to the Mishnah. Amar Yehuda Marav. Chavis Chavis Melea. We are on Dalet Amud Aleph, the middle of the page. Okay. Amar Yehuda Marav. Chavis Melea Mayim. If you have a barrel filled with water, and if Shenafla Liyam Hagadol, a barrel full of water that fell into the Yam Hagadol, fell into the Mediterranean Sea, and now the question is regarding this this water that fell in. What morning, Jaime?
Morning.
We are on Dalet Amud Aleph, new piece of Gemara. We are in the odd scroll. It's 482. It's in the top right corner. 482. Amar Yehuda Marav. Another statement. We were listing a series of statements of Yehuda Marav. Here's the latest statement. Yehuda said the name of Rav. Chavis Melea Mayim. If you have a barrel filled with water, Shenaf, you have it, Jaime?
Yes.
Chavis Melea Mayim Shenafal Liyam Hagadol. It fell into the Mediterranean Sea, and then a guy right after let's say the guy's on the boat, and he has a barrel of water, and the water pours right into the Mediterranean at a certain spot, right when it falls right into the sea, and then right after it fell into the sea, he goes ahead and he's Tovel Sham. He goes ahead and he dips into he jumps into that spot where the water was. The barrel empty out. And then so the barrel empty out. And now the question is, the Gemara is going to make a difference between Mediterranean and a river. A river is flows. Of course, a river is a flowing water. So whatever water fell in will immediately dilute and become mixed among the rest of the waters if it will be a river. But since it's the Mediterranean Sea, it's a body, it's a stable, it's a standing body of water. So there's a concern that a certain amount of that water will remain in one spot. And since it remains in one spot for a short amount of time, so if you jump in and you dip yourself in that, so the issue is you're going into water that was mayim shuvim. There is water that was drawn, but the water that's in the barrel is not good water to use for a mikvah. Now the obvious question is, we know once you have 40 sah you have a kosher mikvah, we said you could pour water into the mikvah after it's already kosher, right? We said the rabbi said you can't go ahead in the making of a mikvah, you can't go ahead and pour water into the making of a mikvah, correct? You can't pour 3 lugim. We said a certain amount of water you can't pour into the making of a mikvah. But once the mikvah is already made, there is no problem to pour water into that mikvah, correct? Once the mikvah is a kosher mikvah, 40 sah mikvah. So what's the issue here? What's the issue here? That's Tosaf's question on Rashi. So what's the problem? So the way Rashi explains is that of course the mikveh, the ocean is a kosher mikveh. It's a stationary body of water. It's a kosher mikveh. It's a stationary body of water that was whether it's even if, like we said, if something is filled up by rainwater, we said if it's stationary, it's not a problem. But the issue here is, it used to be there was a time period that a person, after they would go to the mikveh, they would go ahead and they would throw water on themselves immediately right after going to the mikveh, similar to what we talk about taking a shower. And the issue with that was that people would go ahead and start thinking that the what made you tahar, what made you clean, was not the mikveh water, but rather was the water that you used after you went to the mikveh. Now, because sometimes the water of the mikveh wasn't so clean, perfectly clean. So after they would go to the mikveh, they would pour the water, they would take that, let's say we call that shower. And the rabbis were concerned that people shouldn't make a mistake and think that it's the second water that you pour on yourself makes you tahor, and therefore what people would do it if they would not have a proper kosher mikveh, they would say just pour the water on yourself and that would be good. So therefore, because since it was done on such a regular basis, like this was the norm that people used to do that, so the rabbis got a little, and most probably what happened was, as you remember, that some people, most probably the rabbis might have seen that people made a mistake. They started thinking that the second water was the one that made you pure. So therefore they said you can't, if you do that, it will not help for Truma. And specifically the rabbis said that, of course, on a Torah level, you're not tamei anymore. But if you're a kohen, you want to go ahead and eat truma, you have to. That wouldn't help. Or if you're Yisrael and you want to come in contact, touch truma, you can't touch the truma. You will contaminate the truma. That was the rabbi's decree. Again, the rabbis coming up to the plate, coming to protect, to make sure that because people make mistakes, and therefore they created this. Jaime, is this clear? The rabbis said that if a person after they would go to the mikveh, if they would pour water on themselves, the rabbis would said that it would that now you can't touch truma. Just like a person's hands, right? A person's hands. The rabbis created a Truma on a person's hands. If you didn't wash your hands, right? That's the reason. One of the main reasons why before we have bread, we go ahead and we wash our hands. Why do we wash our hands before we have bread? One reason is for cleanliness. The rabbis want our hands to be clean before we have bread. But another reason is because the rabbis had instituted a contamination on one's hands, because the hands touch all different things. You're not focused on your hands the whole day, and therefore the rabbis created a rabbinic impurity of your hands. That means if you do not wash your hands, you will not be able to handle truma. You wouldn't be able to handle truma. You would invalidate the truma. So therefore, therefore the rabbi said that even the non-kohanim, so who deals with truma is the kohanim. So the kohanim should be careful to wash their hands in order to make sure that because they can't eat truma if the hands aren't washed. So the rabbi says everybody washes their hands, because if the non-kohanim wash their hands, it'll keep the kohanim in shape. So if Hamikdash is rebuilt, they'll be ready in practice of washing their hands before they eat truma. So there was a rabbinic contamination that goes on someone's hands. Once you wash your hands, you purify your hands, and it's no longer rabbinically impure. It has no power to contaminate truma. So the same way the rabbis created that impurity on one's hands, the rabbis created also this, that if you person after they go to a kosher mikveh, the ocean is the kosher mikveh, but if you pour water on yourself right afterwards, or if you immerse your body into 3 lugim of water, because that's the amount of water that, let's say, could cover your body. If you immerse yourself into 3 lugim of water, that would invalidate you. That would handle truma. So that's the issue here in the Gemara. The issue here in the Gemara is: are we concerned that when you're jumping into this ocean, and you just poured into this ocean a barrel of water, are we concerned that you're actually entering into 3 lugim of water that was drawn water? So that's what the Gemara says. We're going to be concerned that because it's a stationary body of water, we're concerned that you might be entering into you're immersing, your body is coming into the water that was drawn, which was in the barrel, which you just had poured into the ocean. Dr. Navid, is that clear? In the actual text, in the actual text, the first word of the line is kidivrei. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. So that now we'll say the words. I said, Mr. Safdie, is it clear what's going on here? Yes, the water in the barrel is mayim shuvim. That's drawn water. Because if it's in the barrel, that means you put it into the barrel. It's not that. And anyways, once it comes in as a result of your strength, that means it's drawn water. It's not naturally collected water. In that, it's water that you collected in a way that you're handling it. You're pouring it in. You drew the water. Even though, again, the ocean is a kosher mikvah, but you took independent water and you poured it into the ocean. And then you jumped in that spot. Now, there's no question about it that on a Torah level, you're good. Why on the Torah level good? Because on a Torah level, once you have a kosher mikvah, you can throw in as much water as you want. Once you reach the magic number 40 sa of water, you can throw in anything you want into that mikvah. It's not going to validate the mikvah. There's no way you can validate the mikvah on a Torah level. But here we're saying that on a rabbinic level regarding Truma, specifically handling of Truma, meaning, let's say a woman to a husband would be permitted. She would go into such a spot, the woman would jump into that spot. It would not. She would be permitted to a husband. It's because she did a proper. The only stringency here is regarding Truma. The spot is this spot of water that you just poured into this ocean. And here you have a nice barrel of water. Now you jumped into that. You just poured the water in, and now right after you pour the water in, you jump right in. But what was the guy thinking? The water is very, let's say, it's salty. It's not so great. So his mindset is, you know what he's going to do? He's going to pour nice, clean water that he has into the ocean, and he'll jump in right there. Let's say that's his mindset. He has nice Poland spring water that he poured into the ocean. He wants clean water that he cleaned beforehand, and now he's pouring it in, and now he's going to jump in. He wants it to be very clean. So that's what he's doing. And again, it's so the chiddush is that we look at this water that even though it's touching the ocean, and touching the ocean makes it automatically kosher. Like the mikvos today, what I would think they do is let's say once you have a kosher mikvah that was made, the rainwater came in, you dug into the ground, the rainwater came in, then and you had 40 sa of rainwater. What they do is they make a hole, and let's say they could even fill up adjacent to that a pit. They'll fill up a pit of water, but as long as that pit is touching this kosher water, so let's say we'll call it the kissing, called hashaka. They're kissing each other, they're touching each other. That once it touches each other, then it's all kosher mikvah. Meaning once you make one mikvah kosher, then you could just keep on attaching. So that's what they most probably do in many of the places that they still have. If you'll have a mikvah right here, the adjacent room there's another mikvah. So that adjacent room there's another mikvah. How did they didn't need to create those two mikvahs in the same fashion. They just had to get one mikvah right. They waited. They needed enough rain to come down to that, fill up that pool of water, so to speak. Then they will go ahead and attach. They could then pour in. They could actually draw water, pour into an adjacent room, and then as long as they're touching this pool of water, is touching that pool of water. That's what I would. Again, I'm not an expert in making of a mikvah. We have to ask experts today. But that's the basic general. Because now it's attached to something kosher, and it's kosher. See. You attach yourself to something kosher, you become kosher. That's the Musa. Jaime, that's the lesson in life. We need to attach ourselves to something that's kosher, then that will make us kosher too. How do you like that?
Why do you think I hang out with you, Rabbi?
Thank you. Maybe that's why I hang out with you, Jaime, in the morning. Thank you. So I just want to say one thing. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to attach yourself to Torah scholars. And there's one of the 613 mitzvot. The Rambam counts it as 113 mitzvot because we hope when you go into the Chacham, hopefully that will rub off on the people and they'll connect more to Hashem. That's the mitzvah. Yes. Right, because we are now focusing on the statements of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. And he talks about many different topics, and therefore that's how we got into to mikvah. The same rabbi, he was the rabbi who spoke about Shemitah. We got into Shemitah. You want to welcome Ariel Maiman on the screen. Ariel, I just spoke to someone this morning about you to see how you were doing.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good morning, everybody.
I asked Dr. Navid about how you're doing.
You're doing good, thank God. Everything is getting better day by day.
We hope to have you back live, hopefully soon.
Thank you very much. Me too. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, we have someone else that joined. I don't see his name on. He's Mr. Anonymous. We'll say hello. I thought it was Morris. Hello, Morris. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. What do you say? Right, exactly. All that water that you pour in afterwards, but so therefore it's 100% a kosher. All the water that's connected, that subsequently was added to the kosher mikvah becomes but part of the original, and everything is kosher on a Torah level. Here, issue here is on a rabbinic level. Say that again. So that's a good question. Okay. So let's see the Gemara. Chavis Melea Mayim. Shenafa, we are on Dalet and Aleph. Chavet Melea Mayim. Shenafa Liyam Hagadol. A barrel filled with water that fell to the Yam Hagadol, that fell into the Mediterranean Sea. Hatovel Sham Lo Osa Lo Tfilah. If you went ahead and you poured a barrel of water into the Mediterranean, and right afterwards you jump into that water that you just poured in, we say that it's not a good dip for if you want to handle Truma afterwards. Why not? We're concerned that when you jump into that water, there's going to be 3 lugim of water that you just poured in will be in one area, one spot. And when you jumped in, you're jumping into water that was drawn water. You're jumping into the water that you just poured in. And that water that you just poured in, if you jump into that water, that will invalidate you for handling Truma. The Gemara says the Yam HaGadol. Somebody said something?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense because, we know the concept, even in the Torah, it's like become like. And the sea is so much bigger. So even if you pour like 10 barrels in the same place in the ocean, it doesn't matter. It's, the ocean is much greater.
Yosef, you're saying what Mr. Safdie said also. You're saying that you're right. On a Torah level, you're 100% right. Whatever you pour into the ocean, that becomes nullified by the ocean, becomes connected to the ocean, and therefore it's 100% like the ocean, and it's a kosher mikvah. And if you jump into that water, you still, even in that area where you put in, you'll be a good dip on a Torah level. What did you say?
Unless you confine an area with the ocean and you limit the water to come in and out from the ocean, it's ocean. It's like, once you pour a bag of salt into the ocean, it doesn't mean the ocean is getting salter. It's such a minor percentage, to make it salt.
Right. So you're 100% right on a biblical level. On a Torah level, you're 100% right. You're safe. They got credit for dipping. The issue here is on a rabbinic level, because you're jumping right in to water the water that you're hitting when you're going in, it's true you're hitting the ocean water, but you're hitting your water. But your water is collecting. It's like make believe. What happened? Let's say oil, right? Oil, let's say collects that. If you put water, when you put oil into a cup of water, right, or whatever, you say certain place you could see the spot where it collects. So you go. So too, we're saying here that the water that you just poured in is like it's on the surface. So even though it's attached and it's a kosher mikvah, but we look at it like we still consider it like you're jumping into water that was drawn on a rabbinic level. And the rabbis, in the same way the rabbi said, if I would pour water on myself right after I go to a kosher mikvah, it would invalidate me for Truma. So too, and the reason, like we said before, because people used to pour water on themselves after they went to the mikvah, and people started making a mistake to think it's the pouring of the water on you that makes you pure, not the actual dipping into the mikvah. So therefore, the rabbis extended that the same way they said that if you pour water on yourself, the rabbis even said it if you go ahead and you jump into that water, because the concern is that people might think that water makes you. That makes you pure. So the Gemara says, "V'dafka liyam hagadol." That's only if you pour the water into the Yam HaGadol, to the great Mediterranean Ocean, the Koivikaima, because the ocean water is stationary, and the waters don't move so much. Therefore, there's a concern that there's these 3 lugim of water that are collected in one area, that you're jumping into that water. Of lanara ba'alma, but if you pour the water of the barrel into a river, a general river, which a river flows, and that's why we said, that's why you have to know that all rivers aren't kosher mikvahot, because a flowing body of water, we said, if the majority is rain, it's not kosher. A river that the majority of the water is rainwater, it's not kosher. The only rivers that are kosher for mikvah, if the majority of the water is natural spring water. Okay, remember that. Only rivers that are kosher for mikvah if it's majority spring water, not if the majority is rainwater. If the majority is rainwater, it is not kosher, because a river flows. A river is not stationary. Since it's not stationary, it's only kosher if it's majority natural springs. The ocean is stationary. Ocean is a kosher mikvah. A river is not a kosher mikvah unless the majority is natural springs. Okay, obviously okay. So the Gemara says, but if you pour the water into a river, and we're talking about a river that's mostly natural springs, nara ba'alma lo, then there's no problem, because that water that you poured in is flowing away. And it's flowing away, and since the river we're talking about is a kosher mikvah for mikvah, so therefore when you jump in, you're not jumping into your water. Your water is gone. It's gone with the wind. It's gone. It's flowing. It's flowing to the other side. That's what the Gemara says regarding pouring this water. Yes.
What about like a pound or legs?
Say that again.
Pound or leg.
So a lake is generally lake is a body of water that's not moving, correct? It's surrounded by it's not a moving body of water. So a lake should be a kosher mikvah, unless the man-made, unless somehow the today's technology, I don't know if people played around with the lakes and repump water in. I'm not sure about the technology, but let's say the big lakes, all the big lakes should be a kosher mikvah. But everything needs to be looked up a little bit just to get more information about certain things. But technically, the big lakes should all be kosher mikvahs. Tanya nami hachi. We also learned in the Braita like this. Now the Gemara says a similar story. That chavis melea yayin. Here we have a case of wine. A more common thing that you carry in a barrel. It's more common you have wine in a barrel than water. I mean, today we're in the, selling water was a new phenomenon a number of years ago. There was no such thing as selling water barrels, So here, but sometimes you maybe if you had a place you had no water, you would maybe have a barrel of water. But who would go, But here we have chavis melei yayin. You have a barrel filled with wine. Shenaflu liyam hagadol. And you pour that wine into the Mediterranean Sea. Okay? And then right after you pour the wine into the Mediterranean Sea, you go ahead and you dip. You jumped in right in that spot, and where the wine, he just poured the wine in. So we said that it's Mediterranean because we said that the water is stationary. So now if you jump into that, that's not, well, no problem. So here we're talking about you poured a barrel of wine into the Yam HaGadol, into Mediterranean, and then you jumped in. So now when you go to a mikvah, your body has to be immersed in water. But here you jumped in, the part of your body was immersed in the wine. So we say, lo also to tefillah. The dipping is not good. That's not a good dipping, because we're concerned some of the wine remained in the spot where you poured it into. And so we see here a proof, a support that the Yam HaGadol, so this is a support for Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Rabbi Yehuda Marav is a later rabbi, he's an Amorav. He told us the law about pouring water into the Yam HaGadol. He says when you pour water into the Mediterranean Sea, the water stays in that spot for a short amount of time. So we see a similar proof from early opinions from the Breita. So that the Breita showed us this idea that it remains collected in its spot, because the Breita says if you throw the wine into the Mediterranean and you dip right there, it's not a good dipping, because we're concerned that you're dipping yourself. Some of your body went into the wine.
What's outside? Don't go up to
It does not go up. It does not count. It does not go up for him. Lo does not go for him, does not count for him as a dipping. Similarly, the Gemara said, same thing as before, exactly. Similar concept, one's wine, one's water, and the concern over here is that some of your body was covered, but did not go into water, went into to the wine. Okay, so the Gemara continues. And they point out over here, one of the laws by mikvah is in order for a person to become purified by going to the mikvah, the whole body has to be at one time in the mikvah, covered, but totally immersed. You can't do it in parts. And if one hair of a person's body is outside the water, it does not help. The immersion of the mikvah is not a good immersion. And that I think, is one of the reasons why, and maybe in certain communities, maybe that the women might cut their hair. Morning, good to see you. They cut their hair a little short because of that concern, that they want to make sure that no parts of their hair remain above the water of the mikvah. Obviously, if there's an attendant that supervises, so therefore there shouldn't be a problem when a lady's hair is not short. But I presume that might have been one of the reasons behind certain communities that because again, when the lady is wearing a head covering, so people, the public generally will not see the lady's hair, and therefore some of them might have a shorter haircut because of that concern.
The reason why he brings wine here is because he's trying to say, even though wine is not considered, it doesn't change the color. Or it doesn't.
Right, the mikvah is still a kosher mikvah, But we're concerned that we're concerned that it collects in the spot, and therefore you're dipping into that item. The previous rabbi said, Yehuda Rav says you're dipping into the water that you just poured in, correct? He said when you pour the barrel of water into the ocean, you're going into the water that you poured. And now he's saying similarly, you're going into the wine that you poured into the ocean. Is that clear? That could have been or not? The point that the proof is that we're showing that you're going into the spot where you poured into. We're showing that the item that you poured into the ocean collects the morning, stays in that spot. It's there. It's not that it just goes in like Yosef was talking about beforehand. That's like you throw something in and usually you throw something into the ocean, it's gone, right? You throw a coin into the ocean. Good morning, Mr. Feldman. Good morning, Mr. Feldman. Feldman and Feldman. Good morning, associates, partners, right? We that's the chiddush over here. So the Gemara says, because we're concerned that when you pour that wine into the ocean, we're talking about pouring something into a body of oil like an ocean, which the ocean water remains stationary. And since the ocean water remains stationary, so right after you poured wine into the ocean, if you jumped into that wine that you just poured in, that would not be a kosher dipping, because we're afraid that part of your body was covered with some wine and not water. The Gemara says, "V'chein." The last point the Gemara says now, "Kika shel truma." Let's say you had a loaf of truma, and you had a loaf of bread of truma, which, as we know, truma is only eaten by the Kohanim, and the special laws of truma, you're not allowed to make truma tameh. You can't contaminate truma. Truma has to remain pure. You could contaminate other things. There's no problem for let's say a person who went to a funeral. There's no problem if they handle regular food after they went to a funeral. Hey, of course they wash, even though of course people after they go to a funeral, you wash your hands right, left, right, left, right, left. But still, if a person doesn't have the ashes of the paraduma, he's still tameh. But there's no problem for me to go ahead and handle my food and make my food, technically contaminated, because I am not responsible to eat my food in a state of purity. A Kohen is responsible, but the truma has to be only able to be eaten in the state of purity. You can't go ahead and contaminate truma. So here we have a loaf of truma. So what happened was the guy took a barrel of wine and he poured it right into and he poured out the contents into the Mediterranean Sea. And immediately right afterwards, he jumped in to that spot of the wine. And then right after that, he had a piece of truma, a loaf of truma, went ahead and touched that spot of the wine that he just poured wine into the ocean, and he just went ahead and he did a dip, and then he puts a loaf of bread and he goes into that spot. We say, what do we say? Good morning. We say that loaf of bread, by touching that spot where the wine was, where he just had touched, because he was tameh, he was contaminated. We say he contaminated that little area that he jumped into, which had the wine, and now the wine becomes contaminated. And now when the loaf of truma touches that wine that he just had thrown into the ocean, the truma becomes tameh. So it's an extension. This is how far we're going to go. How concerned we're going to be about this issue, and we're going to make the truma will be contaminated, and you can't, and that would be that will happen as a result of that. And of course, you can't eat truma once truma is contaminated. Truma would be forbidden to be eaten by the Kohen. So that's v'chein kika shel truma, a loaf of truma shenafal sham, that fell in that spot with the person who was previously contaminated jumped into. and the spot that he had poured the wine, and he hit the wine. Now the wine, we have two steps here. The wine became contaminated as a result of him hitting the wine that he just threw into the ocean. And then now, by putting the loaf of bread becomes contaminated. So the Gemara says, my v'chein. It's obvious. What are you telling us? Isn't this self-understood? If you're concerned that the water, that when you throw the wine in, since it's a stationary body of water, it doesn't flow away, it remains for a short period of time in that spot. So it's obvious, if you're saying it remains in the spot, so it's obvious the wine became tamei as a result of this person who's contaminated hits the wine. And then if the loaf of Truma hits it, it should also make the Truma contaminated. So why does the Braita need to tell me this second law? So the Gemara says there is a great novelty chidush in the second law. There's a general rule: you put something on a chazaka. Even my money matters. If I come to you and I say, you know what, that jacket is mine, and you say, no, it's your jacket. What's the rule? If you're holding the jacket, you're wearing the jacket, I have to bring proof to say it's mine. You have a certain status, or it was owned by you until now. You have a property. We find by property. The property says this belonged to your father. This belongs to you. And now I go and I claim it's my property. So what's the rule? The rule is, if until now you had the property was yours, if I want to go ahead and say it's mine, it's the burden of proof is up on me. There's a chazaka, or let's say a mikvah. If a mikvah has 40, or something has a certain status, now you want to say there's a change in the status. So you have a rule, you put something on its previous status. That's called a chazaka. So let's say what will be another case of that. I mean, generally there's a logic to say, let's say a mikveh has 40 sah, and I went to the mikveh, and then let's say the Gemara discusses if, let's say, later on I found out the mikveh became less, but there's discussion in the Gemara. We have a chazaka that the mikveh was kosher until now, so something that's kosher until now that plays a role in determining how we would look at the item. Put it on. Proof is on the right. Here is something called status. You keep something on it. So you always use this previous status as an indicator. If we have a question. So the Gemara says. So you might have said the following: the person who was tamei to begin with, he was contaminated. His status was tuma. If he jumps into that water, that wine that he just poured into the ocean, so there you have a question. The question is, did some of his body come in contact with the wine, and therefore he did not do a good dipping because you have to be fully immersed in water. So if you have a question, so you put it on his previous status. The previous status was he was contaminated, and now the question is, did he leave that status? Was there a change in your status? So when you have a doubt and you have an existing status, you go after the existing status. So therefore, we say, if you jump into the water and you were contaminated previously, and now you jump in and you just had poured wine in, so now we'll be concerned that maybe you did not do a good dip. However, but when the truma, the loaf of bread, was not tamei, it was pure bread. Now you want to say, now it's a question. Did the status of the loaf of bread change from purity to not purity? Because now the bread hit the wine that was in the ocean, and we want to know, do we say, did it become tamei or not? So that is so you might have said, put it on its status. Its original status was pure. So now we have a question, did it become contaminated? So maybe put it on that morning, Boker Tov. So that's the chiddush. The chiddush is that we're going to be so concerned here that we're not going to leave the pure truma on its status, and we're going to say that there's a change of its status. We're going to say that when you poured the wine into that ocean, and immediately you jumped in and you were tamei, we're going to say you contaminated that wine, and now when the truma subsequently touches that wine, the truma becomes tamei. So that's what the Gemara says. Over there, you put the person on his original status. Of a hacha, uki truma chazaka, you might have thought put the truma on its status. Kamash malan, that's what the chiddush is. The chiddush is that we're really, that the level of concern that we have here is so serious that we're going to say that there's a change of status in the truma. Even though before the truma was pure, but we're concerned that since that truma hit the spot where the person who was contaminated touched the wine, so we're going to say that maybe the truma became contaminated. Okay, it's a complicated case, but it looks like what? You could cause the status change. That's what we're saying we did. Even though you might have thought there's a doubt if there was a true change of status, because you poured it into the ocean, and maybe you would say that maybe you didn't hit exactly that spot of the wine. Maybe the truma, the spot did not. But since as long as you're in that area, the person who was tamei jumped who hit the wine that he just poured into the ocean. Thank you very much, Mr. We thank you also for joining. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Jaime, and thank you, everybody else who was on the screen. Take care.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good day.
Great day.